Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a saga that literally shook a nation. We're unpacking a staggering, multi-decade story surrounding a vital national resource, coal. How exactly did it go from a state monopoly to the dead center of a financial earthquake? Let's trace the origins of Colgate and see how a completely rebuilt, transparent system eventually emerged from the dust. So here's our roadmap for today. We'll start with how the Colgate scandal erupted, move on to the Supreme Court's intervention, look at the convictions and controversies, and finally, explore how the coal sector was completely rebuilt. All right, part 1, the Colgate scandal erupts. Let's set the stage. To understand the mess, we kind of have to look at how the whole system evolved. Back in 1973, coal mining in India was completely nationalized. State monopoly, right? But then, fast forward to 1993. The government realizes they desperately need more production, so they amend the law to allow private Indian companies to mine coal. But, and this is a big but, it was strictly for captive use. That meant they could only mine it for their own specific end uses, like running a power plant or making steel. They couldn't just sell it on the open market. Makes sense, right? Well, here is where the plot really thickens. Between 2004 and 2009, anticipating a massive surge in energy demand, the government screening committee went into absolute overdrive. I mean, they handed out licenses for 75 blocks to private firms and 70 to government companies, all without a single competitive bid. No auction, just handed them out. And then, 2012 hits. The Comptroller and Auditor General, the CAG, drops an absolute bombshell of a performance audit. Which brings us to a number that is frankly hard to wrap your head around. 1.86 lakh crore rupees. According to that CAG report, this was the estimated windfall gained by private allottees. Think about that. Because the government just handed these blocks out without competitive bidding, there was this massive, glaring gap between the high market price of coal and the dirt cheap cost of extracting it from these captive blocks. So instead of the national exchequer, the public purse, benefiting from a national resource, this enormous financial advantage went straight into the pockets of private companies. So obviously, the burning question here is, how on earth did this happen? How did a system meant to fuel the nation's power grids morph into this colossal financial anomaly? Well, the CAG report pointed out that the screening committee's process was entirely 100% opaque. There were zero objective criteria for evaluating applications. You'd have dozens of companies applying for the exact same block of coal, but nobody could really explain how or why the winner was actually chosen. It was like a giant black box. And to make matters worse, companies were just sitting on these blocks, squatting on them. Out of 86 blocks that were supposed to be actually producing coal by 2011, only 28 had even started. Which brings us to part 2. The Supreme Court intervenes. And honestly, this was a historic reset. The Supreme Court steps in and flat out declares the old, opaque screening committee arbitrary and illegal. Done. In its place, they mandated a massive shift to the system we actually use today, a new commercial auction framework. It is literally night and day compared to the old way. The new system relies on highly transparent, two-stage competitive bidding. It uses a national coal index, designed by the Indian Statistical Institute, by the way, to track prices fairly. And it even threw the doors open to allow 100% foreign direct investment to really boost sector efficiency. But to get to that shiny new system, the Supreme Court had to hit the reset button hard. In September 2014, the court delivered a ruling that sent shockwaves through the industry. They abruptly canceled 204 coal block allocations that had been made all the way back since 1993. 204. It was a massive shock. I mean, even blocks that were actively producing coal were canceled. The message from the court was crystal clear. You simply cannot build the future of India's energy sector on a flawed, illegal foundation. Now, let's move to part 3, convictions and controversies. Because Colgate wasn't just about abstract policies, it was very much about the people. To really get a feel for how these backroom deals happened, let's look at one specific case, the Rajhara North block. Picture this, it's 2007. A Kolkata-based company named Vizol applies for this block. Step 1, the state government of Jharkhand actually steps in and says, no, we do not recommend Vizol for this allocation. Step 2, despite that clear objection, former Coal Secretary H.C. Gupta, who was heading the screening committee at the time, recommends the block be given to them anyway. He completely bypassed the state's objections and allegedly hid this entire fact from the Prime Minister. Wild, right? Well, step 3. It finally caught up with them. A special CBI court convicted former Jharkhand Chief Minister Madhu Koda, H.C. Gupta, and several others of criminal conspiracy, slapping them with 3-year jail sentences.
However, this whole judicial reckoning hasn't exactly been smooth sailing without public debate. Take what the media started calling the Dilip Ray paradox. So, Dilip Ray was a Union Minister of State for coal. In 2020, a CBI court finds him guilty of criminal conspiracy tied to a 1999 coal block allocation scam and hands down a 3-year sentence. Now, under a landmarked 2013 Supreme Court ruling, any lawmaker sentenced to 2 or more years is supposed to be immediately disqualified from office, right? Well, here's the paradox. In April 2024, the Delhi High Court took a highly unusual step. They actually put a stay on his conviction, not just the jail sentence, but the conviction itself, specifically so he could go and contest the upcoming elections.
As you can imagine, this sparked a major controversy. An editorial in the Kalinga Scroll really hit the nail on the head, noting, the trial court's findings were based on evidence. The High Court's stay was based on sentiment. Legal experts and observers were fiercely debating this. They pointed out this huge tension between the strict anti-corruption mandates set by the Supreme Court and the High Court's discretionary power that essentially let a convicted politician jump right back into the electoral arena. It's a genuinely fascinating case study in how complex India's judicial system can get when high-profile political figures are involved. Okay, Part 4, Rebuilding the Coal Sector. Let's talk about the new framework. So think about the immediate aftermath of the Supreme Court canceling those 204 blocks. The government had an impending national power crisis on its hands, right? Their answer was the Coal Mines Special Provisions Act, or CMSP Act of 2015. This was absolutely crucial. It officially killed off the era of that arbitrary screening committee. Instead, it built a clear legal framework to transparently reallocate all those canceled mines. This meant either doing it through competitive public auctions where anybody could bid, or through direct, transparent allotments to government companies. And you know what? We can actually see the tangible progress of this new system in the numbers. Out of the 139 coal mines that were successfully reallocated under this 2015 Act, 87 went through the competitive auction process, while 52 were allotted. But the real game changer is the production. Remember how under the old system, companies would just squat on blocks for years doing nothing? Well, today, 60 of these newly allocated mines have already started extracting coal, and 70 have received their mine opening permissions. The coal is literally coming out of the ground to meet the nation's energy demands. And hey, remember that massive 1.86 lakh crore windfall that used to just vanish into private pockets? Well, under the new transparent bidding system, that wealth is actually flowing back to the public. As of November 2025, this new system has generated an actual realized revenue of over 27,776 crore rupees. To put that into perspective, that is a massive injection of capital. And here's the best part for citizens. This money goes directly back to the coal-bearing states themselves, states like Jharkhand, Chhattisgarh, and Odisha, to fund their own local development.
This whole evolution really culminated recently in October 2025 with the launch of the 14th round of commercial coal mine auctions. It anchors a massive policy shift. Back in 2020, the government completely opened up the sector. Those old captive use restrictions, totally gone. Private players can now mine coal commercially and sell it freely on the open market. It has basically transformed India's coal industry from a closed-door monopoly into a dynamic, highly competitive space with fully liberalized terms.
So we've seen the whole timeline, haven't we? From a well-intentioned 1993 policy that somehow warped into a multi-billion-dollar scandal, to the decisive hammer of the Supreme Court, and finally to a completely redesigned, transparent auction framework that's putting billions of rupees back into state coffers. The sector has quite literally been rewritten. But as we look at those ongoing judicial controversies and remember the vast amounts of money still at stake, I'll leave you with this to chew on. Will these new transparent systems actually be enough to permanently prevent the shadows of the past from returning? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and remember to always keep questioning the systems that power our world.